Marcus Steele, a man whose name alone made boardrooms go silent, was the kind of CEO who never lost. At just 40, he had built an empire of steel and glass that pierced the Manhattan skyline, and he ruled it with the same cold precision he used to dismantle competitors. People called him brilliant. They also called him ruthless, and Marcus liked it that way. To him, life was nothing but a series of contracts to win, battles to dominate, and opponents to crush. Love, that was a word he dismissed as weakness. But on a glittering night at a charity gala, surrounded by laughter, champagne, and flashing cameras, his arrogance was about to be tested. His longtime rival and so-called friend, Damian Cole, leaned in with a sly smirk. "Marcus, you win in business, in money, in status. But let's see if you can win where it really matters." Marcus raised an eyebrow, the familiar gesture that signaled both disdain and curiosity. "And where is that, Damian?" "In the heart." Damian tilted his glass, voice cutting through the music. "I bet you wouldn't have the guts to marry a woman who has nothing, no wealth, no connections, no pedigree, someone completely beneath your world." The air around them tightened. Guests nearby turned their heads, waiting for Marcus's reply. His reputation was on the line. Marcus thrived on challenges, and nothing provoked him more than having his courage questioned. "And what's the prize?" Marcus asked coolly, swirling the golden liquid in his glass. Damian's grin widened. $1 million, but here are the rules. You must find her, marry her, and stay married for 6 months. No divorces, no cheating the clock. 6 months, Marcus. Think you can handle that? For most men, it would have been a joke. For Marcus, it was fuel. Competition was oxygen to him, and the chance to prove Damian wrong was irresistible. He didn't pause. He didn't think. He smirked and said the words before reason could catch up. "Deal." The room buzzed with shocked whispers. Marcus Steele, the cold-hearted mogul who measured life in profits and acquisitions, had just agreed to gamble his pride and his future on a marriage to a woman he hadn't even met. What he didn't know was that the woman chosen for him would not only refuse to be controlled, but she would turn his carefully constructed empire upside down. And in the end, Marcus would face a battle he could not win with money, contracts, or power. Days later, the details of Marcus's challenge arrived. On paper, it looked like a simple arrangement. Find a woman, sign the marriage contract, survive 6 months. But the woman Damian had in mind was nothing Marcus could have predicted. Her name was Elena Carter. She was 26, worked double shifts at a downtown diner, and spent her nights caring for her ailing mother in a cramped apartment on the edge of Harlem. Elena had no fortune, no designer gowns, no glittering social circle. Her world was fluorescent lights, chipped coffee cups, and bills stacked high on the kitchen counter. To Damian, she was the perfect opposite of Marcus's life. To Marcus, she was a test he had no intention of failing. When Marcus saw her profile, he smirked. "A waitress? That's the best you could do, Damian?" He dismissed her with a wave, as if she were another line item on a contract. But beneath the arrogance flickered something he couldn't name curiosity. Their first meeting took place not at a gala or a rooftop lounge, but in the very diner where Elena worked. Marcus arrived in a tailored suit worth more than her yearly rent, drawing stares as he slid into a booth. The smell of frying bacon clashed with the faint scent of his cologne. Elena walked over, pen in hand, unflinching. "You must be Marcus Steele," she said flatly, her voice steady despite the weight of his reputation. "And you must be Elena Carter," he replied, offering a tight, practiced smile. She didn't take his hand right away. Instead, she studied his polished cufflinks, his calculated posture, the dismissive tilt of his chin. Finally, she gave a short shake, her grip firmer than he expected. It was not the touch of someone impressed or intimidated. It was the handshake of someone who had already decided she wouldn't bend. "Let's not play games," Elena said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I know about the bet, the money, the 6 months. I agreed to meet you, but understand this, my dignity is not for sale." Marcus's smirk faltered. Few people spoke to him that way. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Then why are you here?" Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Because my mother's medical bills don't wait. And because 6 months of your arrogance won't change who I am. You think you'll control me? You won't." For a moment, the air between them was charged. The clatter of dishes and the chatter of customers faded. Marcus had entered the diner expecting compliance, maybe even desperation. Instead, He found defiance wrapped in humility, a fortress in plain clothes, and it intrigued him. As he left that night, Marcus realized something unsettling. This wasn't going to be the effortless contract he thought it was. Elena Carter was not a pawn to be moved at will. She was a player in her own right. And if Marcus wanted to win, he'd have to fight a kind of battle he had never fought before. The wedding, if it could even be called that, was nothing like the opulent ceremonies Marcus's world was used to. There were no crystal chandeliers, no string quartets, no press releases to announce the union. Instead, it was a brief, cold exchange at a courthouse downtown. Papers were signed, vows were spoken without feeling, and rings were slipped onto fingers with all the warmth of a business deal. Marcus stood tall in a tailored charcoal suit, his expression as unreadable as a contract clause. To him, this was nothing more than an arrangement, another deal to close. He kept glancing at his watch, irritated by the formality of the proceedings. 6 months. That was all it was. 6 months and $1 million. Elena, dressed in a simple cream dress she had bought second-hand, carried herself with quiet resolve. She didn't lower her eyes, didn't play into the spectacle. She met Marcus's gaze only once, and in that fleeting moment, her message was clear. This doesn't change who I am. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, there was no kiss, no applause, just silence. The clerk stamped the documents, and it was done. The union of a cold-hearted CEO and a poor waitress had been sealed, with ink, not love. As they stepped outside the courthouse, Marcus opened the door of his sleek black car, a machine that gleamed like power itself. Elena slid into the leather seat without awe. She looked out the window as if the skyscrapers and flashing billboards of New York meant nothing to her. Marcus noticed, and it unsettled him. 6 months, he said flatly, starting the engine. Not a day more, Elena replied, her tone sharper than the city horns blaring around them. The ride to Marcus's penthouse was silent. From the moment they entered the towering glass building, Elena understood the world she was stepping into. Marble floors reflected chandeliers, walls adorned with rare art gleamed under soft lights. The penthouse was a shrine to wealth and control, and Marcus walked through it like a king returning to his throne. But Elena didn't play the role of a subject. She walked slowly, observing, unimpressed. When Marcus turned to her, expecting awe, she gave him only a steady stare. "This is where you'll live now," he said with a faint smirk, spreading his arms as if unveiling a prize. Elena crossed her arms. "This is where I'll survive for 6 months. After that, I go back to my life. Don't mistake walls of glass for chains." Her words landed like a strike across his pride. For Marcus, every deal came with control, every contract with leverage. But this contract, this marriage, was different. The woman standing in his penthouse refused to be owned, and that simple truth gnawed at him. As night fell over the glittering skyline, Marcus found himself staring at Elena's silhouette against the city lights. The bet had only just begun, but already he sensed it. This game was going to be more dangerous than any boardroom war he had ever fought. Marcus Steele had never been a man to share control. In his world, obedience wasn't requested, it was expected. And now, with Elena living under his roof, he assumed the same rules would apply. On the first morning after their courthouse wedding, Elena woke early, ready to leave for her shift at the diner. But Marcus intercepted her in the foyer, leaning casually against the wall in his perfectly pressed suit. "You won't need to work anymore," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Your place is here now. Everything you need will be provided." Elena adjusted the strap of her worn handbag and met his gaze. "My job isn't just about money. It's about independence. You don't get to take that away from me." Marcus smirked, used to breaking down resistance. "Independence? You're married to me now. What people see when they look at you reflects on me. Do you really think I want my wife serving coffee in a diner while my name headlines business magazines?" Her answer came swiftly, sharper than he expected. "Then maybe you should have thought twice before making a bet out of someone's life." The words stung more than Marcus cared to admit. Still, he tightened his grip on the situation. That afternoon, he called the diner and generously arranged for Elena's shifts to be permanently canceled, masking the move as philanthropy. When she found out, her jaw clenched, but her voice stayed calm. "You can cut my hours," she said, staring at him across the penthouse kitchen. "But you can't silence who I am. Money doesn't erase dignity." The clash became routine. Marcus rearranged her schedule, demanding she accompany him to corporate dinners, charity galas, and press events. He ordered designer dresses, had stylists sent to the penthouse, and expected her to smile at his side like the perfect accessory. But Elena refused to bend. She wore the gowns but carried herself with a pride that unsettled him. When reporters asked questions, she answered with honesty instead of polished rehearsals. And when Marcus attempted to dictate her words, she shut him down with a steady calmness that drew whispers in every room. Late one evening, after another strained dinner, Marcus confronted her in the penthouse living room. "Why fight me on everything?" His voice rose, echoing against the glass walls. "Any other woman would be grateful for what I'm giving you." Elena's eyes flashed, her tone unwavering. "Any other woman isn't me. You think money buys respect. It doesn't. You think control means love. It doesn't. You want me to be a pawn, Marcus. But I'm not playing your game." Her words cut through him like a blade. For a man who thrived on power, Elena's defiance wasn't just irritating, it was intoxicating. Every time she resisted, every time she spoke with unshakable conviction, Marcus felt something foreign stirring inside him. And that terrified him more than any corporate rival ever had. For a brief moment, it almost seemed like Marcus was changing. After weeks of clashes and defiance, he surprised Elena with something she never expected. One afternoon, he quietly arranged for her mother's medication to be delivered directly to their apartment, covered entirely by him. He didn't announce it with the arrogance of a benefactor, just signed the papers and left the package on the kitchen counter for Elena to find. When she saw it, her eyes softened for the first time since their marriage began. She turned to Marcus, hesitant. "You did this?" He shrugged, his voice low. It needed to be handled. It was the smallest crack in his armor, but for Elena, it mattered. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to him than cold control. That evening, he offered to cook dinner and act so far from his character that Elena almost laughed. The meal was simple, clumsy even, but the sight of Marcus Steele in rolled-up sleeves, awkwardly flipping pasta in a skillet, was disarming. They ate together in rare silence, the city lights glittering behind them. For a moment, it felt almost human, but the sweetness didn't last. The very next day, Marcus reverted to his old self. At a high-profile charity gala, he introduced Elena not as his wife, but as a temporary partner in a social experiment, his tone laced with arrogance. The words burned. Elena's face remained composed in front of the cameras, but inside she seethed. Later that night, back at the penthouse, she confronted him. "Do you hear yourself? You turned me into a spectacle, Marcus. I am not your experiment." He leaned back against the glass window, arms crossed. "You agreed to this marriage. You knew the terms. Don't pretend you're innocent in all this." Her eyes hardened. "I agreed to 6 months. I didn't agree to lose my dignity in the process." The sweetness of last night's dinner shattered like glass. What could have been a fragile bridge between them collapsed under Marcus's arrogance. The cycle repeated. Fleeting gestures of kindness followed by cruel reminders of control. Yet, Elena couldn't ignore the contradiction. For every sting, there was a glimpse of something different, a side of Marcus he didn't seem to understand himself. A man capable of thoughtfulness, quickly buried beneath pride. And Marcus, though he would never admit it aloud, began to sense the truth. Elena's presence was chipping away at the walls he had built his entire life. But the cracks only made him more desperate to reassert control. The battle between them was no longer just about a bet. It was becoming something more dangerous, an emotional war where neither side was willing to surrender. Weeks slipped by, each day stretching the fragile truce between Marcus and Elena. He pushed, she resisted. He tried to control, she refused. But one night, the balance finally broke. It began with a heated argument in the penthouse. Marcus had canceled a community event Elena was organizing at the diner's neighborhood, an event meant to raise funds for medical bills of struggling families. To him, it was trivial. To her, it was everything. "You don't get to decide who matters," Elena shouted, her voice echoing against the glass walls. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I decide because I know what's best. That's what I do, Elena. I control chaos. I win." Her eyes flared, and for the first time, Marcus saw not just anger, but something sharper, pity. She stepped closer, her words deliberate, each one striking like a hammer. "You think you're in control, Marcus? You're not. You're the pawn." He blinked, momentarily stunned. "Excuse me?" Elena's voice lowered, steady, unflinching. "All your life, You've played people like chess pieces. You've measured worth in contracts and power. But you don't even see it, do you? You're trapped in a game you don't control. Your pride owns you. Your past owns you. And right now, this bet, Damien owns you. The words sliced deeper than she knew. Marcus, for once, had no reply. He had been called ruthless, arrogant, selfish, but never a pawn. The accusation shook him in ways he couldn't admit. Silence hung heavy until Elena added softly, almost with sorrow. Money can buy buildings, Marcus, but it can't buy respect. It can't erase the emptiness you carry. Marcus turned away, staring out at the glittering skyline he usually found comfort in. Tonight, the lights felt hollow, mocking. For the first time, he questioned not Elena's role in the bet, but his own. Elena left him standing there, and the silence she carried with her was louder than any argument. From that moment, the war between them shifted. Marcus had thought he was the player and Elena the piece. But now, he began to sense the truth. Elena was moving him, forcing him into corners he couldn't escape. And worse, a part of him didn't want to escape. After the night, Elena called him a pawn. Something inside Marcus fractured. He expected her to keep fighting, to lash out with more sharp words. But instead, she did something far worse. She went silent. Days passed, and the penthouse that once echoed with their clashes turned eerily quiet. Elena no longer argued, no longer tried to prove her point. She simply carried on with her routine as if Marcus didn't exist. She cooked for herself, read on the balcony, made phone calls in hushed tones, yet never once acknowledged him unless absolutely necessary. At first, Marcus told himself he didn't care. He thrived on control, not conversation. But soon, the silence began to claw at him. He would walk into a room, and Elena would rise and leave without a word. At breakfast, he tried to spark small talk. "The market's strong today. We should attend the gala Friday," only to be met with a distant nod or no response at all. The absence of attention, the deliberate indifference, ate at him more than open defiance ever had. One morning, unable to take it, Marcus blocked the doorway as Elena prepared to leave. "We need to talk," he demanded, his voice harsher than intended. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "About what?" "About us," he pressed. Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a bitter smile. "There is no us, Marcus. There's a contract. 6 months. Nothing more." With that, she brushed past him, her footsteps quiet but heavy with finality. For Marcus, used to commanding boardrooms and bending rivals to his will, the sensation of being invisible in his own home was unbearable. It wasn't just silence, it was erasure. She had reduced him, the almighty CEO, to nothing more than a shadow in his own empire. He found himself pacing the vast penthouse at night, staring out at the skyline that once represented triumph. Now, each glowing window reminded him of what he lacked: connection, respect, something real. The silence became his punishment. Every time Elena ignored him, every time she treated him like a ghost, Marcus felt his carefully built armor crack. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one writing the rules. And deep down, he realized something terrifying. He would rather face her anger, her accusations, even her hatred than endure her indifference. The silence at home was only the beginning. Soon, Marcus's empire began to tremble. It started with whispers in the boardroom. A critical deal with international investors slipped through his fingers. Then a longtime ally on the board suddenly turned against him, voting with his rivals. Projects stalled, contracts unraveled, and headlines that once praised his brilliance now questioned his stability. Marcus had built his reputation on being untouchable, but now he felt the ground beneath him shifting. At night, he sat alone in his penthouse, the glass walls no longer symbols of victory but mirrors reflecting his isolation. One evening, after a disastrous meeting where his proposals were publicly rejected, Marcus returned home to find Elena on the balcony, sipping tea under the city lights. She didn't turn when he entered, didn't ask about his day. She simply existed in silence, as if his unraveling empire meant nothing to her. "Everything I built is falling apart," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to her. Elena didn't move. Maybe that's because it was built on control, not respect. The words struck him harder than any market crash. He clenched his fists, but there was no one to fight. Not investors, not Elena, not even himself. He was losing, and for the first time, he couldn't buy, threaten, or manipulate his way back to the top. Nights grew longer. He drowned his frustration in whiskey, staring out at the skyline as if the city owed him answers. Sleep eluded him. Each day blurred into the next, filled with empty meetings and colder silences at home. One night, Marcus caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, eyes hollow, tie loosened, shoulders slumped. He barely recognized the man staring back. The ruthless CEO, the king of glass towers, now looked like a ghost of his former self. And Elena? She remained steady, calm, untouched by his downfall. Her silence was a fortress he couldn't breach, and her calmness made his collapse feel even more complete. The man who once commanded rooms with a single glance now found himself ignored by the one woman he most wanted to reach. And that, more than losing deals or money, was what truly broke him. Marcus Steele had spent his life pretending nothing could touch him. Power, money, control, those were his weapons, and he wielded them to keep the world at arm's length. But as his empire crumbled and Elena's silence hollowed out his soul, the cracks grew too wide to hide. One night, after another failed attempt to repair a broken deal, Marcus stumbled into the penthouse late. He found Elena reading quietly in the living room, her presence calm yet unyielding. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking, then sat across from her without invitation. "Do you want to know why I don't believe in people?" His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. Elena looked up, surprised. She said nothing, but her eyes urged him to continue. "My father," Marcus began, staring into the glass in his hand. "He was an honest man, a dreamer. He started a small construction company, poured everything into it. But he trusted the wrong people. Partners betrayed him. Clients disappeared. One night, he came home, looked me in the eyes, and told me he was sorry." Marcus's voice faltered. "The next morning, he was gone. Suicide. And all I could think was if he had been stronger, if he had been ruthless like me, he'd still be alive." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Elena closed her book slowly, her face softening for the first time in weeks. "So you built walls," she murmured. "You turned into the very thing that destroyed him." Marcus's jaw tightened, shame flickering in his eyes. "I swore I'd never be weak like him. I would never let anyone control me, never let anyone walk over me. That's why I fight. That's why I control. Because if I stop, I lose everything." Elena leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "But Marcus, don't you see? In trying to escape his fate, you became a prisoner of it. You don't control anything, you let fear control you." Her words hit him like a truth he'd avoided his entire life. For the first time, Marcus felt exposed, stripped of the armor he had worn for decades. And in Elena's steady gaze, he saw not contempt, but something he hadn't earned in years, compassion. But compassion wasn't the same as forgiveness. And Marcus knew the wound inside him was far from healed. Marcus had spent years thinking apologies were for the weak. Words, in his world, meant little without contracts or signatures. But after bearing his past to Elena, he realized words alone could never heal the damage he had caused both to her and to himself. So, for the first time in his life, he tried something different. He acted. The change began quietly. One morning, Elena walked into the kitchen to find the table set with fresh coffee, black, no sugar, exactly the way she liked it. Next to the mug lay a small bouquet of lilies, her mother's favorite flower. There was no note, no speech, just the gesture. At first, Elena dismissed it as another manipulation. But Marcus persisted. When she returned from visiting her mother, she discovered he had arranged for in-home care, ensuring her mother wouldn't be left alone when Elena couldn't be there. He didn't boast about it, didn't even mention it. He simply let her find out on her own. Meanwhile, at work, Marcus began making decisions that startled even his fiercest critics. He reinstated employees he had once fired unjustly, reopened community programs his company had cut, and even attended local meetings in neighborhoods his empire had ignored. The press spun it as rebranding, but those close to him sensed something different. For Marcus, it wasn't strategy, it was atonement, Elena noticed. She saw the way he returned home exhausted but less arrogant, less hollow. He no longer boasted of conquests. Instead, he listened to her, to his staff, even to silence without demanding it be filled. One evening, as she sat on the balcony, Marcus quietly placed a cup of hot tea beside her. He didn't sit until she gestured to the chair next to her. For minutes, they simply watched the city in silence. Finally, Elena broke it. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus's gaze stayed on the skyline. Because I don't want to be the man I was. I can't undo the past, Elena, but I can choose what I do now." There was no arrogance in his tone, no demand for recognition, just honesty, raw and unpolished. And for the first time, Elena felt the weight of sincerity in his words. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't erase the bet. But it was a beginning, small, fragile, and real. For Marcus Steele, that was a greater victory than any deal he had ever signed. The 6 months were nearly over. To Marcus, time had slipped away faster than any fiscal quarter. What began as a reckless bet now felt like the most important battle of his life, not for money, not for reputation, but for Elena. One stormy evening, Marcus returned home early from a brutal board meeting. Shareholders were circling like vultures, eager to push him out. Yet none of it weighed on him as much as the silence he expected when he opened the door to his penthouse. Instead, he found Elena waiting in the living room, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. She closed her book and looked at him. "About what?" He swallowed, realizing he was more nervous than he had ever been in front of any investor. "About us. About me. Elena, when this began, I saw you as a contract, a challenge to win. But now—" He hesitated, searching for words that had never come easily. "Now I can't imagine this life without you. I love you." For the first time, the cold-hearted CEO admitted vulnerability. His eyes held no arrogance, only a desperate sincerity that shocked even himself. Elena studied him carefully, her silence stretching the moment thin. Finally, she spoke. "Do you even understand what love means, Marcus? Love isn't control. It isn't ownership. It isn't about winning." "I know," he admitted quickly. "That's why I'm terrified. Because I don't know how to prove it to you." Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "Then here's my test. If you truly love me, you have to risk more than money or pride. You have to risk letting go of control." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" She stood, stepping closer until they were face to face. "Tomorrow, your board will vote. Everyone knows it. If you keep fighting like you always have, maybe you'll win another quarter. But if you really want to show me you've changed, you'll walk into that room and put people, not power, first. Sacrifice what you built for something greater. That's the only way I'll believe you." The challenge hung between them like a blade. For Marcus, control was survival. To let go would be to dismantle the very foundation of who he was. But in Elena's eyes, he saw the truth. This was the final test. He took her hand, gripping it with trembling resolve. "Then tomorrow, I'll prove it." And for the first time in his life, Marcus Steele wasn't preparing for a business battle. He was preparing to gamble his entire empire not to win, but to love. The boardroom was packed the next morning, tension thick enough to choke the air. Marcus Steele, the man once feared for his ruthless precision, stood at the head of the long mahogany table. Every eye was on him. They expected a fight, another brutal defense of his empire. Instead, Marcus placed his notes on the table and spoke with a clarity that stunned even his rivals. "For years, I believed power was everything. That control kept me safe. But I was wrong. A company can't survive on fear. It has to be built on people, on respect, on something real." Whispers rippled through the room. Marcus didn't flinch. "If that means losing this seat, then so be it. I'd rather walk away with integrity than hold on to a crown built on emptiness." Silence. For once, Marcus wasn't fighting to dominate. He was surrendering control, and in that surrender, he found freedom. Hours later, he returned to the penthouse, weary but lighter than he had felt in years. Elena was on the balcony, the city skyline glowing behind her. She turned as he entered, searching his face. "Well?" she asked quietly. Marcus exhaled, a faint smile breaking through. "I didn't win today. I chose to lose. And it felt right." For a moment, Elena said nothing. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and took his hand. "That's the first honest victory you've ever had." The weight between them dissolved. Marcus, the man who once measured worth in numbers and contracts, now measured it in the warmth of her touch. For the first time, he wasn't chasing a bet or proving a point. He was choosing her freely, without calculation. 6 months had begun as a cruel wager. But standing there, hand in hand, Marcus and Elena both knew it had become something else entirely. A love forged not in wealth or power, but in surrender. As the camera of the city lights flickered like a million witnesses, Elena whispered the words Marcus never thought he'd hear. "Maybe love was your greatest deal after all." And so, The cold-hearted CEO who once believed he could buy the world discovered the one thing money could never purchase: love. But here's the question for you. If you were Elena, would you forgive Marcus? Could you trust a man who once saw love as a game? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want more stories of love, redemption, and the battles between pride and heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the most unbelievable endings are the ones we never saw coming.